All right, welcome to Speech Writing Part 2. Here we're going to start talking about introductions and getting a good format for your speech going. So, let's get started. So, the big thing for your speech is there's a couple of things that you have to make sure that it has. And one thing is, first off, you have to make sure that the speech has some kind of logical flow, okay? So if I were to give the three things that a good speech does, first thing is it flows logically. We can see how the speech or the paper goes from beginning to end without wondering how you got from point A to point B. So there's some kind of flow to it to where we can follow it and we can see how you progressed from talking about the history of cats to talking about how cat breeds are flourishing today to talking about the future of cats. It makes sense. It's chronological order, so we can know where you are in your speech. Secondly, I think a good speech also reflects you, okay? And when I mean you, I mean in terms of your voice and your personality. So some of you might be very entertaining speakers where you can make a lot of jokes and you're high energy and you're smiling and laughing and all that. Some of you might be more serious speakers, and there's nothing wrong with being more of a high energy or maybe a more serious speaker. It's all about trade-offs, right? Some things are just better for you than others. But either way, you want the speech to reflect you and your personality. The idea is that you don't want to be so stiff when you're up there to where you really can't reach anybody because you're just kind of boring. You're too stiff. Okay, so you got to loosen up. Thirdly, there should be a clear takeaway. Okay, and we have to know that after your speech is over that there was some point to it, because that's what people usually wonder after they read a speech or read a paper is, what was the point of all this? And so you want to make it clear throughout the speech, throughout the paper, that these are the clear points that I want you to remember. Okay, now the thing that I'm going to teach you is what I call 5-point format, okay? So in 5-point formats, you have the introduction, you have main point 1, main point 2, main point 3, and conclusion. Oops. Now, you might have seen this all before, maybe in high school, and, it's one of those things where every time I teach it, though, it's always new to somebody. So the thing about 5-point format is that it's incredibly useful for both paper writing and speech writing, and in fact, it's what I used throughout college and graduate school, was essentially this format. Now, here's how the format usually goes. If we do it on the scale in terms of the whole paper, okay, the intro is where you basically, grab the attention. The main points are like the meat, if you will, the argument. And the conclusion is the wrap-up. So the intro is what first off introduces us to the points, it grabs the attention, and it tells us, here's what I'm going to talk about. The main points are essentially those things that you're going to talk about. Okay, so here's the message. You all need to get better at writing, and one thing that will help you is the online writing lab that's available. Okay, the conclusion is the wrap-up. So overall, there's two ways you can get better: practice and Writing Center. Use both of these as soon as you can. Blah, blah, blah. That's a wrap-up. So the idea with 5-point format then is you try to think of it like a sandwich, okay? So you have bread, the intro, the meat, and another bread, all right? And the intro is a bread that kind of lets you know here's what's going on. The main points are here's what's going on, and the conclusion is here's just what happened. Or in other words, here's what's going to happen. So the intro, here's what's happening, and here's what happened. Or better yet, when you're writing a speech or a paper, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. Now, it might seem like a little bit repetitive, because you might be thinking, well, isn't that repetitive? Like you're kind of repeating. The thing is, especially in a speech where people can't go backwards, they can't rewind what you said, people are very apt to forgetting things as they go along, especially as you get into really, really deep points. And so these help people remember where you are and what you said, so that way there's some reinforcement. Because the idea is this: in a speech, you are what you emphasize. And if you emphasize a point for 5 minutes and the speech is 7 minutes long, we're going to remember the 5-minute point more. But if you just talk about something for 20 seconds and then you move on to something else, and then for the next 6 minutes and 40 seconds you're talking about something else, people probably aren't going to remember the 20 seconds as well. So you are what you emphasize. Now, we're looking at this on a speech scale. And what we could do is we can look at this on an even more microscopic scale. So, for example, with the intro, okay, so within an introductory paragraph. So this is like the whole speech. If we were to outline the whole speech into one paper, you could have your intro paragraph, okay, so this could be a paragraph, that could be a paragraph, that could be a paragraph, that could be a paragraph, and that could be a paragraph, okay? But we can even break it down even more. So within the intro paragraph, okay, your first sentence will probably be an attention getter. Your second sentence will be like a tie-in of some kind, and maybe second through fourth sentence might be a tie-in. Your fifth sentence will be probably a preview, okay? And I'm going to talk about these in depth. But still, you see kind of the idea. The attention getter is what grabs the audience's attention. So the attention getter might be a quote. Martin Luther King once said, "I have a dream that one day this nation will be equal among people." Okay, I don't know, I'm just making it up. Okay, so then you have the tie-in. So what Martin Luther King was talking about was the importance of having equality, being at the center of all public American discourse about discrimination. And what my speech is going to talk about today is what we can do to improve equality in America. What we're going to do is we're first going to look at laws that we can pass. Then we're going to go into things that we can do socially, and then lastly, things that we can do personally to make sure that everyone feels welcome. So essentially, that was a whole speech that I just made up on the fly. And you had the attention getter, the tie-in, and the preview. So the attention getter opens up, introduces us. The tie-in is the meat, the preview is the bread. So within a paragraph then, you have an intro, you have your main points, and you have a conclusion. And then you do the next paragraph. So your main points. And within your paragraph of main points, you can have the same thing. You know, you transition in, which is like bread, tying it in. 2 to 4, you make your main point. And number 5, conclude that paragraph. So basically, you can think of 5-point format as like a Russian doll, where each paragraph can be a speech within a speech. And then when you write papers, for example, so let's like go on a larger scale here. Let's see if this lets me move. Okay. Trying to get to larger scale. Okay. Yeah. Pinch. Okay, fine, doesn't want to move. Okay, so we'll go to a larger scale here. I don't know, for some reason it doesn't want to get bigger. So, let's see. So, yeah, every point can be a point within a point. So, when you're doing a paper, for example, this is what I was trying to get at. So, when you're doing a paper, and let's say you have to do a long main point. So, let's say, you know, in your paper, you have your intro. So, we'll hear. Paper, you have your intro. And let's say, for part 2, your main point 1, you actually want to make 5 points within main point 1. And, like, each point's going to be really long. Then you can section off your paper to where you have like a subsection, and you know that's where you have subtitle or like subsections in your paper, and then you can title it, you know, main point 1 or whatever, and then within that, you can have, you know, an intro, conclusion, an intro to your main point one within main point one, main point two within main point one, main point three within main point one, and then conclude. And that can be a little essay within your main point one point, which is a point within your whole entire speech. So does that make sense? So it can be a Russian doll. You know, like those dolls within a doll within a doll within a doll? Basically, it's the same thing here. Within each main point, you can have an intro, main points, and conclusions. And then even within this, you can make it even more. So you can maybe have an intro, and then main point one has its own little mini 5-point format or 3-point format, you know, an intro, main point, conclusion. Then in here, you can do that, and you can just do it on forever and ever if you want, just as long as you can cohere it all together at the end. So this should function as a good format for you when you do essay writing. That's the whole point of showing you this, is that this gives you a way to structure your speeches. And what we're going to do for this section is we're going to focus on just writing introductions. And then there's going to be a part 3 probably where we'll do main points and conclusions. But we got to do introductions, and we got to spend a lot of time here because the introduction is one of the most important pieces of the speech. Now, everything's technically important in a speech, but like this, if you mess this up, you're not going to get here. So let's do it. Okay. So within an introduction, so now we're just focusing on one paragraph in the puzzle here, okay? So go down to the scale of a paragraph. Within an introduction, there's a couple things you want to do. Remember that introductions are your speech's first impression. So within the first 20 to 30 seconds of you talking, your audience is already deciding if they're going to listen or not, if this is going to be a good speech or not, or if this is going to be a boring speech. Your audience is already making judgments on that thing. So you have to make sure that your intro is good, that you have some way of really getting our attention at the beginning, so then you can keep it as you keep going. So you want to start off your speech with a bang of some kind. And usually what we teach are, we use these things called attention getters. Attention getters are devices used at the beginning of your speech and throughout to captivate your audience's attention. It shows them that you're not just looking to get by. So, there are two classes of attention getters. So, you first have pre-speech attention getters. And pre-speech attention getters are ones that take place before you even start talking. So these are before you even open your mouth. And you have things like reputation. So if you're a well-known expert or celebrity, people might just listen to you because of who you are. So if I were to have Brad Pitt come and talk in my class, like, he's going to already have people's attention before he even starts talking because he's Brad Pitt, right? And Brad Pitt could be giving a lecture about, like, puppies, right? And he'd just be like, puppies are furry animals. And everyone would just be like, oh yeah, right, puppies are furry animals. Yeah, and like everyone's writing notes and stuff. Like, so he could say anything and people would be engaged just because it's him, right? So that's where reputation comes in. There's also these things called anticipatory sets. And anticipatory sets are basically props used in a speech that are in view before the speech even starts. So if you were to start off, like before you even started talking, if there was like some interesting props on a table that you were going to use. So maybe you had like a hat on the table and like maybe a cake, okay, on the table. So the audience is going to see that before you even start talking. So at that point, the audience is going to be wondering, ooh, what are you going to be doing with that cake? Or what are you going to be doing with that hat? And that's going to increase attention, right? Because they're going to want to know, well, what's he going to do with that thing? And what's he going to do with this thing? And that anticipatory set works in your favor. Dress can do that too. So if you wear a costume, or if you wear something interesting before the speech starts, people might wonder, like, what are you doing? Why are you wearing that? but that's also going to increase engagement because they're going to want to know why you did that. So wearing a funny costume, wearing something that just is out of the normal from what they expect, that's going to work. And lastly, introductions. And these are like introductory remarks is what I really want to call them. So if you're ever hosted as a speaker and somebody gives an introduction about you, that can be pre-speech attention getters, because ideally when the host introduces you, what the host should be doing is building your credibility. They should be doing things like saying things that make you seem like a more credible speaker, because then that helps you in terms of selling your credibility. Because it's always easier and it's always more believable when somebody else vouches for you than when you have to vouch for yourself. Because it's assumed that if somebody else is vouching for you, it's true, because anybody can say anything about themselves. But, oh, you got somebody else to say this about you. Oh, that's a little bit more believable. So those are pre-speech attention getters. And then lastly, you have in-speech attention getters. So let's see here. I'm going to see if I can move this out. There we go. See, I learned this Zoom feature, and it's pretty awesome. All right. So you have in-speech attention getters, excuse me. Okay. And in-speech attention getters, there's a long list of these. So I'll try to write them down as clearly as I can, but you might just have to go by listening. So one is an anecdote. So one way you can start a speech is by telling a quick story. Just start off your speech. One day I was walking down the street and I found $5. And when I pulled up the $5, I noticed that there was blood on the money. So if you found blood on your money, what would you do? That kind of thing. So when you tell the story is supposed to evoke something. It's supposed to make people think, And sometimes if you're telling a sad speech, you'll start off with a sad story. Martha Smith had only one chance at life. When she was 6, she had leukemia, and leukemia kept her in the hospital for over 3 years of her life. And during that time, Martha struggled. And unfortunately, 5 years later, Martha passed away. And it's now even more important that today we find ways to fight leukemia. And, and then you just kind of keep going. Then you start getting into your attention getter, or you got through your attention getter, and then you tie it in and then preview your points. So that's one way you can start it. Next, you have provocative statements. So TED Talks do this a lot. And a provocative statement is like a statement that seems to be counterintuitive, okay? And it's just something that will get people listening because it is counterintuitive. So I might do my provocative statement. I might start off saying, public speaking isn't performing. Yes, you heard me right. Public speaking isn't performing. Many of you come to public speaking wanting to learn more about how do I perform better? How do I do this better? How do I make sure I close my speech better? You see, and so then I can tie that in, you see? You can build suspense. So what you can do is in your intro section, you can talk about something without talking about it until like the last minute. So you can say, ghosts, they're everywhere, and they're in this room. There's a reason that there's so many ghosts in this room and that you can't see them. There is something in this world that is causing more and more ghosts to appear every day, and it's something that we can prevent. What is this thing? Disease, or something like that. So you find a way to talk about something without giving it away. You kind of build up kind of a riddle, essentially. You build up a riddle, and then you give the answer. And that's got their attention because they're wondering, what's causing the ghosts? Where are these ghosts? Who are the ghosts? You see what I mean? And that's how you basically lure the audience into paying attention. The other way you can do this, and these are a little bit more active. Let me see if I can zoom out again. Okay, so I have to go over here. Okay, so another thing you can do is you can invoke audience participation. And these are still attention getters that we're doing, okay? So you can invoke audience participation. And there's a couple ways you can do this. A simple way is to do show of hands, okay? So you just start off your speech. By show of hands, how many of you have tests this week? And you just do a show of hands. You can also do thumbs up. You can also do the thumbs if you want. Thumbs up if you have a test this week. So just starting off like that will get people doing something. You see, that gets their attention and it keeps them going. The next one is the close your eyes. So you can start off your speech. I want you to close your eyes. Imagine it's finals week. You have this big test coming up. Your grade depends on how you perform on this test. And if you don't get a good grade, you will fail the class. So you're feeling that anxiety the day before. So what do you do to deal with that anxiety? Well, today, I'm going to teach you state management. You see what I mean? So the closing your eyes, the imagining, that's getting your audience involved. You can do a discussion question. Who says that you can't discuss with your audience when you're speaking? So just have a discussion question. How many of you have been on a bad date before? So you can have people raise their hands. And then you can say, who wants to share their story? And then you can have somebody just quickly tell their story. Just be ready for a volunteer. And also, if nobody volunteers to answer, then make sure you have a story to volunteer. So if you're like, how many of you have been on a bad date? Raise your hand. Anybody want to share? And like nobody raises their hand. Then okay, well, I'll share mine. One time and then you can tell your story about your bad date. You can ask for a volunteer. So just ask for a volunteer. So like, I need a volunteer. Okay, and then like somebody raises their hand. What I want you to do is I want you to come up here and I'm going to have you do something. So if you're going to ask for a volunteer, you got to ask them to do something. So have them do something interesting. If you're doing a demonstration speech especially, like this would be a good time to get a volunteer involved and get them help you to do something. And that's another way to get participation. You can also address someone in the audience. So if you know somebody in the audience, you can start off your speech talking to them. You can be like, hey, Chris, remember that one time I did this, this, and this, and they start talking back? What that does is now that lets the audience know that you're conversing with them. And who knows, you might call on somebody else to do something. So address someone in the audience or point them out and say, hey, what do you think of this? Sometimes it's okay to do that. Now it's risky because some people may be like, that kind of thing, but still an idea. Also, if you can do the famous teaching tool, think, pair, share. In think, pair, share, the idea is to first encourage your audience to think of something on their own. So have them think of a time when you had to do X. Think of your dream job, okay? So write it down. What do you think your dream job is? Then pair them up. Say, okay, now talk to the person next to you. Tell them about what you came up with. Okay, so they pair it. So that's the pair phase where they, talk to each other about things. And then you have the share phase. Okay, so now you've talked to your partner. Who wants to share what they talked about? So think, pair, share is a great way to get the audience started. And there's no rules in public speaking in terms of saying you can't get your audience involved. You have to think about logistics, right? Because logistics, remember, are about being able to implement things. So if you don't think you're in a place where people can really respond or people can't really think, pair, share because of noise or something, then obviously you can't do that. So then logistics would say, yeah, you can't do that. But still, maybe you can have people close their eyes. Maybe you can do a show of hands thing, like I assume your audience will have hands. And so think of those other ways by which you can creatively adapt to your audience while still using these tools. But there's still even more possibilities for gaining your audience's attention. So let's look at some more. So we've talked about invoking audience participation. Other ways include using humor. Now, there's some risk to using humor because you have to make sure that it's actually funny, because if you say something and it's not funny at all, then that's kind of a point against you, because now people are like, well, this guy thinks he's funny and he's not. So you got to be careful with humor. You got to make sure it's actually funny, and you got to make sure it's not offensive either. Classic quotes. Start your speech with a quote. As Martin Luther King once said, that kind of thing. It's cool if you can start with a funny quote. So quoting like Dan Quayle or like somebody funny, that's always a good way to get the speech started because you get your audience laughing. And then you can tie the quote to your speech. Or you just ask a rhetorical question. So a rhetorical question is a question that doesn't require an answer to be effective. And usually the rhetorical question is like a question that makes a statement. So it makes a statement by not requiring an answer. Okay? So a rhetorical question might be, what's the first sport that you think of when you think of the Winter Olympics? Do you think of curling? Do you think of skiing? Do you think of ice skating? Well, today I'm going to do my speech on today I'm going to inform you about snowboarding, the sport that gets overlooked, blah, blah, blah. So when you make it a rhetorical question, you're not waiting for an answer. You just kind of ask it, and then you start suggesting things, and then you take it the direction that you want. Okay? So that's where you would use a rhetorical question. Now, after the attention getter, once you've grabbed the audience's attention, you then have to do 4 things. Okay? So now in the paragraph, what we're doing is okay, what do I do after I throw one of these out there? So these are after the attention getter. And like I said, a lot of these apply to speeches. Now, of course, you can't be like, by a show of hands in a paper. Like, you can't do that in a paper, obviously. But you can still encourage your reader to think about a time when you've done this. How did that go for you? If you've thought of this, blah, blah, blah. I mean, you can still do that in a paper. Okay, so after the attention getter, the next thing you have to do is you have to tie the attention getter to your speech. Okay? So the first thing you got to do is you got to tie the attention getter to your speech. So if you start off with a quote, you can't just be like, Martin Luther King said, I have a dream that one day we're going to be equal. Okay, so today we're going to talk about discrimination. Like, you got to somehow tie like the quote to what it is that you're going to be talking about. So you might want to say, so Martin Luther King said, I dream we're all going to be created equal and live in harmony. And this harmony that he talked about is non-existent in today's society. So today we're going to figure out what are the causes of discrimination, the contemporary causes of discrimination in society today, and what we can do about them. Okay, so you notice how you take the quote and you dissect it or you unpack it to make it clear how is this relevant to your speech. So you got it. One of your first tasks after you get the audience's attention then in your speech is to tie the attention getter to your speech. The other thing you want to do is you want to give your thesis, right? Or at least the idea of what your thesis is. You want to make it clear in your speech what it is that you're going to be arguing. If your intro is over and I still don't know what your speech is about or like what you're going to be arguing or the side, then that's going to be a problem as well. What you also might want to do is you might want to motivate your audience too. And so what you want to do there is you want to motivate them to want to listen to your speech, okay? And so you want to give them some kind of incentive to keep listening. And the motive might be something like, and it's important we learn how to tie our shoes because there might come a day where you need to tie them or whatever. So motivation is is trying to find a way where the topic will apparently be useful to them. And lastly, what you want to do is you want to preview your main points. Now, when you preview your main points, you don't have to necessarily go through each point in depth, but you want to give a preview of like the themes of your main points. So if you're going to do the history of the toilet, right? So you might start off your speech acting out you going to the bathroom, if you will. In fact, somebody actually did do this. So that's one attention getter I didn't mention, by the way, is doing acting and singing. So that's another one. But anyway, so you're acting out, you're going to the bathroom, then you flush the toilet, and you can say, what I just did here, I just used the toilet. The toilet is one of the greatest inventions known to mankind because it's responsible for all kinds of uses and problems that it avoids. So today we're going to learn about the history of the toilet. We're going to learn first how it was invented, secondly how it's evolved as a invention, and lastly we're going to learn about future ways the toilet is going to impact how we flush or something like that. Okay? So what I did there was I previewed the main points. I said, here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about how it's invented, how it's evolved, and where it's heading in the future. And you notice that the main points have a logical flow. It's a chronological order. And notice also that I tied the attention getter. So I said what I just used was the toilet, one of the greatest inventions ever created. And the thesis, the toilet has been a very important piece in keeping us sanitary and all that stuff. So you can see every little bit of the intro having this, okay? I didn't really hit on motivation there, but I at least had the other three, and that's what's important. If you can at least have these three, then that's good. Okay, so some tips, or just one tip. The big tip is this, okay? Don't get top heavy, okay? So this is what happens to some people, is they write such a long intro. Like their intro, like in a 5-minute speech, their intro takes up like a minute and a half, okay? You don't want to get so top heavy on the intro. So if you're going to do something that's a little bit out there for an attention getter, you got to make it so that you can tie it really fast. If it takes 30 seconds for you to explain why did you just sing this song to relate it to the topic that you're doing, it's probably not the best attention getter because there's too much time required to prove or to justify the song singing to the topic that you're trying to present on. So you want to try to pick an attention getter that is intuitive to the speech so that you don't have to do as much work in terms of tying it, and then you can get more to the point on the thesis and previewing the main points. If you get too top heavy, you hurt yourself later and then you have to rush the end of your speech, or you don't even get to finish it within the time allotted. Okay, so that's basically introductions, and the next bit we're going to do main points and conclusion for part 3.